In the glittering skyline of Manhattan, where wealth and power converged in towering monuments of glass and steel, Billy Thompson stood at his penthouse window, nursing a glass of scotch that cost more than most people's monthly salary. At 62, he'd built Thompson Enterprises from nothing into a $15 billion real estate empire. But tonight, his thoughts weren't on business deals or acquisitions. They were on the small velvet box his son Tom had proudly shown him earlier that day. "She's the one, Dad," Tom had said, his eyes shining with the kind of hope Billy hadn't seen since his son was a child. "I'm going to ask Helen to marry me." Those words had sent a chill down Billy's spine, colder than the ice in his glass. He took another sip, remembering how he'd forced a smile, congratulated his son, all while his mind raced with memories he'd spent years trying to forget. 25 years ago, Billy had heard similar words leave his own mouth about Clara, Tom's mother. She'd been a waitress at a small diner where he'd stop for coffee during his early days of building his empire. He'd fallen for her genuine smile, her simple dreams, her seemingly uncomplicated love. 3 years into their marriage, after Tom was born and Billy's first billion was made, he discovered the truth. Clara had been meticulously planning her exit, working with lawyers to secure the largest divorce settlement she could. She'd never loved him. He'd just been her ticket out of serving coffee for tips. The memory made Billy's hand tighten around his glass. He'd learned then that love was a luxury billionaires couldn't afford. Every relationship came with a price tag. Every smile concealed a calculation. And now history was threatening to repeat itself with his only son. Helen Carter, a night shift nurse at Metropolitan Hospital. On paper, she seemed perfect, dedicated to helping others, working long hours saving lives, living in a modest apartment in Queens despite dating one of New York's most eligible bachelors for the past 2 years. But Billy Thompson hadn't built an empire by taking things at face value. He'd had her investigated, of course. The reports showed no red flags, graduated with honors from nursing school, worked double shifts to support her mother through a costly illness, volunteered at homeless shelters on her days off. It all seemed too good to be true. And in Billy's experience, if something seemed too good to be true, it usually was. Walking to his private study, Billy pulled up the latest surveillance photos on his tablet. Helen leaving the hospital at dawn, dark circles under her eyes. Helen and Tom at a small coffee shop, her laughing at something his son had said. Helen alone, stopping to help an elderly man who dropped his groceries. Every image painted a picture of genuine kindness, and that's what worried Billy the most. Nobody was this perfect without an ulterior motive. "Mr. Thompson," his private security chief's voice crackled through the intercom. "The background report you requested on Miss Carter's recent activities has arrived." "Send it up," Billy commanded, his voice carrying the authority that had made him both feared and respected in New York's business world. The report confirmed what he already knew. Helen had recently sold her car, using the money to pay for her mother's final round of physical therapy. She'd picked up extra shifts at the hospital, despite Tom's repeated offers to help financially. Every time his son tried to give her expensive gifts, she politely declined, saying she preferred their simple dates in the park or cooking dinner together at her small apartment. It was driving Billy mad. Either Helen was the most genuine person he'd ever encountered, or she was playing the longest, most sophisticated con he'd seen since Clara. With Tom about to propose, Billy couldn't afford to wait and find out the hard way. That's when the idea first took root in his mind. He walked over to his wall-length mirror, studying his reflection. Despite his years, he still cut an imposing figure, tall, distinguished, with silver hair that added to his aura of authority. But with the right changes, the right clothes, the right story, Billy Thompson had built his empire by taking risks, by doing what others wouldn't dare. He'd gone undercover before, posing as a small-time developer to uncover corporate espionage. But this would be different. This would be personal. Picking up his phone, he dialed a number few people knew existed. "Jack," he said when the line connected. "Remember that job we did in Dubai? The deep cover operation? I need your team again. Full transformation package. And I need it done within the week. May I ask the target, sir?" Jack's professional tone couldn't hide his curiosity. Billy looked again at the photo of Helen on his tablet, studying her smile as she helped the old man with his groceries. "My future daughter-in-law," he replied grimly. It's time to find out who Helen Carter really is when she thinks nobody's watching. As he hung up the phone, Billy walked back to the window. Below, New York City sparkled like a jar of spilled diamonds, each light representing thousands of people living their lives, chasing dreams, harboring secrets. Somewhere out there, Helen was probably starting her night shift, putting on her nurse's uniform, preparing to save lives. Was it all an act? Or was Billy about to make the biggest mistake of his life by testing her? Either way, he'd know soon enough. Because Billy Thompson was about to become something he'd fought his whole life to avoid. A homeless man on the streets of New York, invisible to the world except as an object of pity or scorn. And from that vantage point, he would discover the truth about Helen Carter, even if it meant risking his relationship with his only son forever. Taking one last sip of his scotch, Billy Thompson made the call that would set everything in motion. The game was about to begin, and the stakes couldn't be higher. His son's heart, his family's future, and perhaps, though he didn't know it yet, his own chance at redemption. The transformation was more grueling than Billy Thompson had anticipated. Jack's team worked meticulously for hours, aging his skin with specialized makeup, adding subtle liver spots and weathered creases that spoke of years spent under harsh sun. His perfectly maintained silver hair was replaced with a disheveled gray wig, carefully matted to look unwashed. His manicured hands were roughened with theatrical calluses and artificial dirt ground into the creases. The final touch was a set of yellowed dental caps that transformed his million-dollar smile into something painful to look at. When Billy looked in the mirror, a stranger stared back. A man beaten down by life, someone people would go out of their way to avoid on the street. Perfect. Remember, Jack said, handing him worn, layered clothing that smelled authentically of the streets. The best disguise isn't just physical. You need to change how you carry yourself. Forget everything about being Billy Thompson. For 3 days, Billy practiced. He learned to shuffle instead of stride, to keep his eyes down instead of meeting gazes directly. He studied homeless people from his car, noting how they moved, how they waited, how they survived. By the 4th day, when he settled onto a piece of cardboard near Metropolitan Hospital's staff entrance, even his own security team had trouble recognizing him. The first test came sooner than he'd planned. As dawn broke over the city, Helen emerged from the hospital's sliding doors after her night shift. Billy watched her through lowered eyes, his heart pounding despite his careful preparation. She looked exhausted, dark circles visible under her eyes, her nurse's uniform slightly wrinkled from a busy night. He waited until she was a few steps away before launching into a seemingly violent coughing fit, doubling over on his cardboard. Most of the hospital staff streaming past gave him a wide berth. Some looked annoyed, others concerned but unwilling to stop. Billy counted the seconds, wondering if Helen would prove him right by walking past like everyone else. The footsteps approaching him were soft but deliberate. "Sir, are you all right?" Billy kept coughing, watching through watering eyes as Helen knelt beside him, still in her scrubs after a 12-hour shift. She didn't hesitate to place a gentle hand on his shoulder, didn't flinch at his appearance or smell. "I'm fine," he wheezed, using the raspy voice he'd practiced. "Just the cold." "You don't sound fine," Helen said firmly. "Let me help you inside. We can get you checked out." "No hospitals," Billy growled, injecting fear into his voice. "Can't afford it. Won't go back to those places." Instead of pulling away, Helen sat down next to him on the cardboard. Billy fought to hide his shock. Her actions were already deviating from every scenario he'd imagined. "Okay, no hospital," she agreed softly. "But at least let me check your vitals. I'm a nurse and you don't sound good." For the next 10 minutes, Helen stayed with him, checking his pulse, listening to his breathing, and asking gentle questions about how long he'd been on the streets. Billy stuck to his practice story. Frank Miller, former factory worker, lost everything in medical bills. He watched her face carefully for any sign of falseness, any hint of the calculating look he'd seen in Clara's eyes years ago. He found none. "Mr. Miller," she said finally, reaching into her bag. "I want you to take these." She pulled out a paper bag that he soon discovered contained a sandwich and an apple. "It's just my lunch, but you need it more than I do." And here's some cough medicine from the free clinic. Please take it. Can't take your lunch, Billy protested, playing his part while his mind raced. This wasn't a show for anyone. It was 6 a.m. No other hospital staff were paying attention, and Tom was nowhere nearby to hear about this act of kindness. You can and you will, Helen insisted with a smile that carried the same warmth she showed to his son. I get a meal discount in the cafeteria anyway. Just promise me you'll take the medicine? Before Billy could respond, Helen's phone buzzed. He recognized the ringtone. It was Tom calling, probably for their usual morning check-in. This was it, the moment she'd reveal her true nature by complaining to his son about the homeless man she'd had to deal with. But Helen didn't answer the phone. Instead, she turned it to silent and returned her full attention to Billy. The medicine might make you drowsy, she continued as if there had been no interruption. There's a shelter 3 blocks down on Kingston that has beds available in the morning. Please consider going there to rest. Billy mumbled a thank you, maintaining his character while his mind struggled to process what he was seeing. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Helen was supposed to either ignore him or help briefly for show. She wasn't supposed to miss a call from Tom to help a homeless man. She wasn't supposed to give away her lunch without hesitation. She wasn't supposed to look at him with genuine concern that made him feel suddenly ashamed of his deception. But the real shock came as Helen stood to leave. She pulled out a small notebook, wrote something down, and handed him the paper. This is my number, she said quietly. I work night shifts here most days. If you need medical help and still don't want to go to the hospital, call me. Anytime. She walked away before he could respond, her scrubs slightly dirty from sitting on the cardboard beside him. Billy watched her go, the paper with her number burning in his hand like an accusation. In all his scenarios, in all his plans, he hadn't prepared for genuine kindness freely given. But he wasn't done. One act of kindness could be a coincidence, a single good deed that didn't prove anything. Billy Thompson hadn't built an empire by jumping to conclusions. As he pocketed the sandwich and medicine, he began planning the next phase of his test. He'd set up the briefcase with the money tomorrow. Surely, when faced with $100,000 in cash, Helen's true nature would finally reveal itself. Yet as he watched her small figure disappear around the corner, an unfamiliar feeling gnawed at his conscience. The possibility that he might be terribly, horribly wrong about his son's choice after all. The morning sun cast long shadows across the city streets as Billy, still disguised as Frank, positioned himself near the hospital's parking lot. It had been 2 weeks since his first encounter with Helen, and each day had left him more confused than the last. The briefcase test had failed spectacularly. Helen had turned in the $100,000 to the police without hesitation, despite whispering to herself about her mother's mounting medical bills as she walked away. Today was different. Today was the test that would reveal everything. He watched as 2 men in expensive suits, his own employees, though Helen wouldn't know that, loudly discussed Thompson Enterprises near her car, making sure she could overhear as she approached after her shift. Old Frank's got enough dirt to bury Billy Thompson 10 times over, one said, their voices carrying deliberately. Knows about the Jersey deal back in '95. That alone could tank the company's stock. Shame he's just a homeless guy now, the other replied. That kind of information could be worth millions to the right people. They walked away, leaving the bait perfectly laid. Billy, hunched in his usual spot, watched Helen's face as she processed what she'd heard. For the first time in 2 weeks, he saw calculation in her eyes, and his heart sank. Finally, her true nature would emerge. Helen walked directly toward him, and Billy steeled himself for the attempted manipulation. The subtle probe for information, the mask of kindness finally dropping. Frank, she said softly, sitting beside him like she had so many times before. I heard something disturbing just now. People might come looking for you. Dangerous people. I think you might be in danger. Billy blinked, caught off guard by the genuine concern in her voice. My car's just there, she continued, surprising him further. I know you don't like hospitals, but I have a spare room in my apartment. You can stay there until it's safe. Why? Billy managed to rasp out, his practiced voice almost cracking. Helen's eyes filled with tears that shocked him to his core. Because I see how Tom hurts when he talks about his father's hatred for me. I hear the pain in his voice when he mentions his mother's betrayal. The Thompson family has suffered enough. She took a shaky breath. Whatever you know about Billy Thompson, keeping it secret might protect Tom from more pain. That's worth more than any amount of money. Billy sat in stunned silence as Helen continued. I know you probably think I'm dating Tom for his money. Everyone does. But I love him because he brings me coffee during my breaks, even at 3 a.m. Because he reads to children in my ward using funny voices. Because when my mother was sick, he sat with me in silence for hours, just holding my hand. She pulled out her keys with trembling fingers. So please, let me help you. Not for information or money or anything else. Just because it's right. What happened next would haunt Billy Thompson for years to come. As Helen spoke about her love for his son, she pulled out her phone and made a call. Billy tensed, expecting the worst. But once again, Helen shattered his expectations. Hi, Mrs. Martinez? It's Helen from the hospital. I know you're selling your grandmother's necklace to pay for Tommy's treatment. I'd like to buy it. Yes, the full price you asked. I can bring the money tonight. After hanging up, she wiped her eyes. That necklace will help me get you the medication you need, Frank. I've noticed your hands shaking, the way you clutch your chest sometimes. Classic signs of untreated heart problems. Your grandmother's necklace? Billy asked, his disguised voice barely a whisper. It was going to be my something old for the wedding, Helen said with a sad smile. But some things are more important than traditions. Now, will you please let me help you? In that moment, as the morning sun painted the city gold, Billy Thompson, billionaire, business titan, hardened skeptic, felt something inside him break. This woman was selling her precious heirloom not for profit or gain, but to help a homeless man who supposedly had information that could make her rich. But the final blow to his carefully constructed wall of suspicion came as Helen helped him stand. You know what's funny, Frank? You remind me a little of Tom's father. Not the ruthless businessman everyone talks about, but the man Tom describes from his childhood. The one who taught him to ride a bike and helped with his science projects. The one who seemed to lose his way after being hurt too deeply. She gathered her things, still holding out her keys hopefully. Sometimes I wish I could meet that version of Billy Thompson. I think he and I might understand each other. Billy stood there, overwhelmed by the weight of his deception and the purity of Helen's heart. In trying to protect his son from another Clara, he had nearly destroyed his chance to know a woman who was worth more than all his billions combined. The time for tests was over. Tomorrow at the family dinner, everything would change. But for now, Billy Thompson, still disguised as Frank, could only watch in awe as this extraordinary woman continued to choose kindness over opportunity, love over money, and healing over hurt. What he didn't know was that the greatest revelation was yet to come. The Thompson family's private dining room at Lou Cirque buzzed with nervous energy. Tom kept checking his pocket where the diamond ring waited, while Helen, still in her nurse's uniform after another exhausting shift, tried to stifle her yawns. Billy Thompson's empty chair loomed at the head of the table, his absence noted but not unusual. He often ran late for family dinners. What happened next would become legend in the Thompson family for generations. The maitre d' approached their table, his professional composure slipping slightly. Excuse me, but there's a gentleman insisting on seeing Miss Carter. We tried to stop him, but... Frank. Helen shot up from her chair as the disheveled figure shuffled into the exclusive restaurant. Other diners turned to stare, some pulling their designer bags closer. What's wrong? Are you okay? Tom stood too, confusion written across his face. Helen, you know this man? Before she could respond, Billy began to sway, clutching his chest. But this time, it wasn't an act. The weight of his deception, combined with the pure love and concern in Helen's eyes, made his heart clench with real pain. I need to tell you something, he wheezed, his voice still in Frank's raspy tones. About your future father-in-law. Not now, Helen interrupted, already in nurse mode. She guided him to Billy's empty chair, ignoring the shocked gasps from nearby tables. Your heart rate is elevated. Just breathe. Helen, Tom said gently, maybe we should call security. He's family, Helen replied firmly, surprising everyone. Or at least, He will be. She turned to Frank with determined eyes. Whatever you know about Billy Thompson doesn't matter anymore. This is about your health now. That's when Billy did something he hadn't done in 25 years. He began to cry. With trembling hands, he reached for his wig, pulling it away as the expensive makeup began to streak with his tears. The restaurant fell silent as Billy Thompson, one of New York's most powerful men, emerged from the disguise of a homeless man. "Dad." Tom's voice cracked with disbelief. What is this?" Helen stood frozen, one hand still on Billy's shoulder, as the truth dawned in her eyes. But instead of anger or betrayal, something else filled her face, understanding. "You were afraid," she whispered. "Afraid I was like her." Billy nodded, unable to speak through his tears. The weight of 3 weeks of deception, of watching Helen's countless acts of kindness, of seeing her sell her grandmother's necklace to help a man who didn't even exist, it all crashed down on him at once. "I don't want your forgiveness," he managed finally. "I don't deserve it. I needed you to know that I was wrong. So wrong. My son chose better than I ever could have." The silence stretched for an eternity. Then Helen did something that would change the Thompson family forever. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small bottle of heart medication. "You still need to take these," she said softly, placing them in front of him. "Disguise or not, your heart symptoms were real. I've been worried about them for weeks." Billy stared at the bottle in shock. "You're still taking care of you?" "Yes." Helen's voice was firm but gentle. "Because that's what family does. Even when they hurt us, even when they don't trust us, we take care of each other." Tom, who had been watching in stunned silence, suddenly laughed, a sound of pure joy and relief. "And that," he said, dropping to one knee and pulling out the ring, "is exactly why I want to spend the rest of my life with you, Helen Carter. Not because you're perfect, but because you make everyone around you better. Even my paranoid, overprotective, ridiculously sneaky father." Through her tears, Helen managed to say yes 3 times before Tom could even finish his proposal. Later that night, as the family sat together over dessert, Billy still in his shabby clothes, Helen still in her scrubs, Tom grinning like a fool, Billy reached into his pocket and pulled out a familiar necklace. Mrs. Martinez was quite surprised when a homeless man offered her twice her asking price, he said, holding out Helen's grandmother's necklace. She thought it was a miracle. Maybe it was. Helen took the necklace with trembling hands as Billy continued. "I spent 3 weeks trying to prove you were too good to be true. Instead, you proved that I wasn't good enough to see the truth in front of me. But if you'll let me, I'd like to spend the rest of my life learning how to be the father you believed Frank could find again." "Well," Helen said, wiping away tears as she fastened her grandmother's necklace, "you can start by volunteering with me at the hospital. There are a lot of real Franks out there who need help." "Done." Billy agreed immediately. "But first," he turned to Tom with a mischievous smile. "Son, let me tell you about the time your fiancée gave a billionaire her lunch and made him cry." And so, in an exclusive New York restaurant, wearing clothes from a homeless shelter, Billy Thompson finally understood what real wealth looked like. It looked like his son's joy, Helen's forgiveness, and the second chance he never knew he needed. Some say money can't buy happiness, but sometimes, pretending to have no money at all can lead you right to it.